Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Metrics That Matter, an analysis of customer lifetime value. We decided to organize this webinar because we get a lot of different and interesting questions from people that we work with when speaking at conferences. And it seems like the main question is, well, how much money should we be spending on marketing? Or how much money should we be spending to drive loyalty? How much is the new acquisition worth to our business? And many organizations, unfortunately, think very transactionally in terms of how do we generate that next purchase, how do we generate that next transaction, or how do we drive revenue. And some organizations that we see to be very successful in the space of e-commerce and retail are the organizations that are thinking about their customers holistically, and who are the types of customers that are going to generate the most value for their business over an extended period of time, over lifetime, because ultimately those are the types of customers that you want to have. And so today what we decided to do is talk a little bit about customer lifetime value, what it is, what it does, and how to leverage it in your everyday marketing activities. I am your host and one of the presenters, Michael Loban. I work at InfoTrust. InfoTrust is a global digital analytics consultancy and technology company. And we work with hundreds of enterprises, global CPG companies, retailers, helping them implement digital analytics solutions and identify most profitable customer types and build strategies to acquire them. And today I'm joined by Allison Snow. Allison is a senior analyst at Forrester, and her research focuses on customer and business insights. She has served in leadership, sales enablement, and revenue marketing roles as a practitioner and has held senior positions with technology firms of various sizes. Her research helps firms employ analytical methods that facilitate deep understanding of prospect and customer behavior and identify trends and patterns in data that support revenue growth, customer delight, and operational excellence. Allison, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you, everybody.
This is our third program with Forrester. We've done two up to this point on different aspects of digital analytics. All the webinars, including this one, have been recorded and will be shared at the end of this webinar. We will also send out a recording of this webinar, and it will be available online. So if you're running late, that's okay. The recording will be available for you to review. So what do we want to cover today? Well, we'll start with customer lifetime value and overview to make sure that all of us have the same definitions, because very often different terminology means different things for people. Some think about customer lifetime value as how much the person has spent with that organization up to this point. Some people think about customer lifetime value as a projection. So we'll start with defining what customer lifetime value is. And then Allison will walk us through different CLV and other analytical methods. Then once we have a good understanding of what CLV is and how to calculate CLV, we'll talk about applications of customer lifetime value in terms of driving our marketing and business efforts. Because if we know how much revenue and how much business value a certain customer or a segment of customers can generate for the business, then the natural question is, well, how do we find people that are very similar to this type of segment, so we can focus our marketing acquisition on generating the most profitable customer types. Then we'll take a look at CLV maturity indicators. There's always a question that organizations have on their mind, well, how do I compare to some other companies? Or am I better at my execution of CLV than my competition? And so Allison will walk us through a couple of models of how we can begin thinking about this. And we'll certainly have some time for Q&A. And please post questions throughout the presentation, and we will monitor the Q&A panel. And we will address some of the questions throughout the presentation, as well as at the end of the presentation. And so with that, let's dive into customer lifetime value and overview. So the predominant need, I would say, that's driving the interest in customer lifetime value is the focus on real long-term success, not simply driving conversions. A lot of times when we talk with marketers, the question on their mind is, how do we acquire a new customer? How do we generate a new sale? And very often their promotional strategy is very heavy on using coupons or promoting sales and really creating that desire to complete a purchase among customers. But what that often means is that the transaction takes place, but the customer is really not sold on the business. And so the customer does not stay with the business. And so the organization tends to overspend on driving a conversion, driving a sale, and ultimately does not attract the type of customer or the type of prospect that will stay for that business for an extended period of time. And it's not cost efficient to design optimal customer experience for everyone. You have to select where you want to invest your advertising dollars. In the past, we've done a webinar with Professor Pete Fader from the Wharton School, and he spends quite a bit of time talking on how to think about the customers who are most least profitable for the business, and certainly you want to cater to those that generate most value for your organization. So focusing your time, focusing your efforts and ad dollars on customers that will create value for the company long term. But what is a CLV? So CLV is the present value of the future net cash flow. But what does it really mean in plain English? Well, that means the projection of how much customer A or a segment of customers A will spend with your brand over their lifetime. So, for example, if I've shopped at Nordstrom or at Macy's over the past 3 or 4 years, then my CLV is based on my past purchases, based on various other points of information that we will discuss. What is the total projection of how much money I will spend with Macy's until I stop being their customer, I stop shopping online or offline for that matter. So it's a forward-looking concept, certainly not to be confused with the historical customer profitability. So whenever we talk about customer lifetime value, it is a projection. It's not a sum of what we've spent with the business up to this point, but rather based on what we've spent with the business up to this point, is the projection of how much money we will spend with the business over foreseeable future. And considering that it is a projection, there are different factors that fall into calculating that projection. And so some of the points or data points that fall into calculating the customer lifetime value are churn risk, especially if you have a subscription business. It's purchase propensity, the likelihood that the person will spend with you, various spending habits, certainly the historical value. And all of those items working together help us generate customer lifetime value. So really, for you to begin working with this, you need access to your CRM data. A lot of times we can be using even data from a tool like Google Analytics or Adobe Omniture if all of your transactions take place online. And we generate export of your customer past purchases, either from your CRM or from technology like Google Analytics. And then we can run it through different statistical models that take these data points into account. Now, one of the prerequisites for any organization to calculate customer lifetime value is the quality of this data. And here you can see the research by Forrester, where they've asked organizations their biggest challenges with marketing programs. And you can see that number one challenge with the marketing program is managing data quality. Obviously, we all know garbage in, garbage out. And it can be true than this customer lifetime value, especially since it is a projection. The quality and accuracy of your data is very important. Otherwise, your estimates will be wrong, and hence it will drive your marketing strategy in a very wrong direction. And just to give you a perspective, 1 day of missing data, so for example, if your Google Analytics tag has stopped working, Adobe tag has not is not working, and you are not collecting information about your online transactions, 1 day of missing data from analytics can result in 3% of all monthly conversions. So a big piece of your monthly data will be missing. And over peak days, such as Black Friday or Christmas Day or other days like that, such a drop will represent 5 to 10% of monthly conversions. And another point why this is so important is every time you are not tracking these data points in a tool like Google Analytics or Adobe Omniture or whatever you use on your website to track e-commerce transactions, these inaccuracies impact all of your downstream systems. And certainly at the end of the month, you have to present this information to your management, to your executives. You have to explain to them a drop in charts, and instead of showcasing what the organization should be doing, you have to explain why the organization has lost so much data. And now let me turn this over to Allison to walk us through one of the examples of an organization that is able to leverage, calculate and leverage customer lifetime value and put it to good use.
Michael, thank you so much. Want to dive into a use case, but first kind of say thank you so much for setting the stage. And I see customer lifetime value, I first see it as core to so many other analytical methods, which we will talk through today, but really at the heart of program evaluation, prioritization, and managed purposeful growth. So when you said, let's talk about it in plain English, I'm really excited because we don't talk about this concept nearly enough in plain English. So in that spirit, I want to jump in to look at a basic construction of CLV in practice. And we'll zoom in on one sort of simple use case, which is, should a firm be willing to spend a certain amount of money to acquire and serve a customer? So we're looking here at Netflix, as you can see. Many of you are familiar with this brand. And we'll examine, again, pretty simply, what are the factors that we have to work with in this particular example? So we've got figures around how much revenue a customer is worth every month. We've got figures that represent how long we can reasonably expect the average customer to remain a customer. And we understand about how much the investment will be to attract, cultivate, close, and serve that customer. It's not extraordinarily complex. We're simply analyzing whether we should invest $150 to acquire and serve this customer given these figures. Clearly, what we're looking for here is for the revenue to outweigh the investment. And it does. I don't want to oversimplify customer lifetime value at the outset here, but in fact, this is what plain English looks like when it comes to describing customer lifetime value. It's a really good opportunity to reflect on some of the figures in the formula, though. I want to point out that in the $150 figure, that value came from somewhere. We're using it in our example, but underneath that value, it captured costs, like I said, to attract, cultivate, close, and serve. So Netflix and every company really needs to determine what cost burdens to consider for that number. What cost do you hold against the cost to acquire and serve and advertise to and close that customer? Again, we assume there's some advertising costs baked in there, some costs for legal, contract building, et cetera. But one of the reasons the calculation is more complex than meets the eye is that there are that series of organizational decisions behind it. But this is a good example of what that calculation looks like. I mentioned that, I sort of mentioned at the beginning of my comments, how this metric is core to many other analytical methods. Analytical methods to me are like promotional channels, and I know marketers will understand this. You can't just use one and expect notable impact. No one method across the board can really Every method used in tandem with each other can improve the accuracy of models, predictions, and recommendations. And we'll see a little bit about how that works when we go through some other analytical methods. But first, we'll zoom out just for a moment and keep something in mind as we look at the suite of customer analytics we're about to review. We're walking through them to underscore the interdependency of analytics techniques. Fundamental to all of them is the customer lifetime value metric. When we look at analytical techniques, we wonder, what's the intersection of analytical methods and customer lifetime value? What's the intersection of better channels and high-value customers? We'll examine all of this as we go. So we'll keep customer lifetime value as our center of gravity today. I know that's why you've all attended, but also highlight other analytical methods that support goals like acquisition, retention, cross-sell, upsell, loyalty, personalization, and contextual marketing. We'll dig into each of the analytical methods on this graphic that you see here. So this graphic may be a bit hard to read for you at the moment. It contains some detail about which methods support or boost others specifically. And that will make a little more sense as we walk through. But of all the images I've contributed to this deck, this is one I suggest you keep in print. I know that these slides will be available to you after. I personally refer to this fairly often. So I want to dive into the pieces of that graphic, those methods that drive acquisition. We'll start with these three methods, but they're employed for acquisition, but also for retention, upsell, and loyalty, of course. The first is behavioral customer segmentation. It's one of the oldest and most widely adopted in the customer analytics toolkit, but that doesn't mean it's always well implemented. Right now, as companies, we're dealing with a lot more in-motion data, behavioral data, data that's not static, data that changes, increasing transaction data, and trying to build methods to accommodate that data to continuously feed our models. Because of that, and because customers are so demanding and want relevant experiences all the time, static segmentation schemes will become less useful and more on-the-fly segmentation algorithms will emerge. Some segmentation, behavioral segmentation that are built by a dynamic customer lifetime value figure, for instance. But generally speaking, this method uses behavioral customer data, things like product usage, which is obviously dynamic and always changing, transactional data, web activity, also dynamic, response data, and loyalty data to create relatively discrete and homogeneous segments. What's exciting here is that we've got lots more data sources than we ever did, thanks to things like text analytics and speech and attribution analytics. The availability of granular behavioral data here will really power these models. Of course, customer lifetime value analysis, the kind of star of the show today. What's so special about it? First, it helps provide the value of marketing in financial terms. It's really one of the only financial metrics in marketing that takes into consideration both the costs to serve customers as well as the resulting value and revenue that customers generate. That makes it really compelling to all sorts of audiences internally. It has the potential to become a forward-looking indicator of the health of customer relationships because of the ability to forecast future revenue streams from an individual customer. You can imagine how much this powers programmatic decisions. It helps marketers create value across the customer lifecycle by targeting customers based on not just propensity and other models, but the actual potential value of those programs and campaigns. Frequently, it helps marketers decide to increase investments in channels that consistently deliver them customers with high value. It also informs creating a differentiated approach for retaining different customer insights. So marketing may spend more to cultivate loyalty and high-value customers through loyalty programs, and not so much let others attrite, but understand that there is a priority to the must prioritize personalized outreach when you can to be more efficient in your marketing as well. Customer lookalike targeting is just what Michael was describing earlier when it comes to looking for customers that look like yours. So firms can take a number of methods here. They can take every firm that they've won, all of their closed deals, and say, give me customers that look like this. But clearly an advanced way to do that is to say, I want customers that look like my highest value customers. This is really an opportunity to highlight the role of customer lifetime value, as we will across the board here in other analytical methods. Again, you'd really want to take the model, the data you give to a model to find lookalikes, you'd really be smart to say, let's give this model a list of accounts that are high value and ones that we really want to replicate. We turn to 3 methods here that primarily increase retention and loyalty. First is customer propensity analysis. This is a foundational customer analytics method and is adopted to understand propensities of customers to do a great many things. A lot of times this is associated with an acquisition model, but really we can understand propensity to buy, respond, engage to specific campaigns, churn, convert at a specific conversion point, unsubscribe, or really any other customer action. These models also identify the most likely additional products that a customer might purchase out of a set of products offered. These methods typically feed next best recommendation engines, which we'll also talk about when we arrive at the next slide. Customer churn and attrition. Churn analysis helps marketers determine what level of effort will be required to keep which customers. It's highly valuable for firms committed to profitable customer retention, and most of us are. It not only helps us understand who might churn, but in combination with some other methods, helps marketers focus attention on the most profitable segments. You won't be surprised that customer lifetime value plays a key role in this method. A good churn model reveals a list of customers that are at risk of defecting, a list. It's the CLTV metric that guides prioritization for targeting and prevention after that. So again, one model building on another. Social network analysis is one of the methods we include here for retention and loyalty, but it's really far less widely used than some of the other techniques we're talking about today. Ultimately, though, so you're aware, the method searches for complex patterns of influence and expertise among networks of customers. One of the reasons that this method is still in its infancy is that it relies upon a very high volume of very unstructured data. Our presumption here as Forrester is that it will gain adoption as technologies increasingly allow for the processing of that kind of complex, outside of a graph and unstructured data. Three methods drive personalization. Next best action analysis that we've already teased around a little bit. Simply stated, this makes analytics useful when they're needed the most. Next best action uses historical data to predict the offer or experience that will drive a customer to take a desired subsequent action. Most of the time, it involves deploying predictive models within recommendation engines. Next best action analysis is really where all the predictive customer analytics methods come to life at the various points of customer interaction. It calls on propensity analysis, it calls on churn modeling, and of course it calls on customer lifetime value, and that you want to provide a next best action that is consistent with forecasted future value. Recommendation analysis has become the poster child for predictive analytics. It's the engine behind the experiences that you expect on platforms like Netflix and Amazon. It typically guides next best action recommendations and is also the foundation of upsell and cross-sell analysis to drive average revenue and product adoption per customer. Obviously, in methods that drive personalization, we've got cross-sell and upsell analysis as well as ways to drive incremental revenue for existing customers. This really does depend on understanding which products are typically consumed together, as well as the purchase capacity in a particular client. And it has interdependencies as well on things like recommendation analysis. Other methods improve customer experience. These methods look like customer satisfaction analysis, engagement analysis, and journey analysis. Satisfaction analysis uses data from surveys, feedback forms, and customer service interactions to quantify customer satisfaction. It gives firms a pulse on how satisfied customers are with various interactions. This method is very mature, and all of you are likely using some form of customer satisfaction analysis. But as far as how this method plays well with others, its value is really enhanced when combined with loyalty, retention, and attrition analysis to understand the triggers and drivers of things like retention and churn through the lens of satisfaction. So what are the satisfaction levels associated with high churn, and what are the satisfaction levels associated with retention, and are there hidden patterns there? Customer engagement analysis really just considers the volume, quality, and type of multi-channel interactions that would result in a highly engaged customer. This is really relevant to attribution analytics. It has a lot to do with looking at the journey from awareness to purchase and understanding that there's an engagement flow that may or may not be relevant to certain cohorts, that being one of the cohorts being members of your high value CLTV segment. Customer journey and pathing captures the customer's path toward a certain action, specifically like acquisition or attrition. This allows businesses to focus on journeys with the highest impact on key metrics like customer retention, and certainly, again, like lifetime value. 3 methods improve contextual marketing. Text analytics is really a big one. The last time Forrester dug into this number, it appeared that approximately 80% of the world's data is unstructured, and that most organizations are using only 31% of their unstructured data for business insights and decision making. And even though that's alarming enough, I would say that based on my experience and the conversations I have, it's likely that far more of the world's data is unstructured and that companies are using even less of it. It's text analytics that will help here. Analyzing text-heavy customer data sources like voice of the customer data, social media sources like we talked about before, call center transcripts that contain lots of insights around what's making people happy, what's making them not happy, feedback forms that have unstructured text fields, and surveys. This is really key to understanding some of the why behind customer behavior. Text analytics is still largely untapped, and we think it represents a real forward push in customer understanding. Customer location analysis is where data. It comes from location-aware devices so that companies can present contextual offers near a location of interest like a store or a mall. Obviously, this is especially important for firms that need to design and manage and even measure offline experiences. One of the things that we always caution here is while this is a fantastic analytical method in the family of customer analytical methods, it will depend on things like privacy compliance that firms will have to determine for themselves, how much they stick to regulations versus just define their own ethics around the use of privacy data. Customer device usage is similar when it comes to some of that privacy data. Marketers are just beginning to analyze and make sense of behavioral data that comes from specifically sensor-laden devices like fitness tracking devices and smartwatches. Some of the early examples of this that are probably unexpected, but a device usage analysis would come from something like Disney's Magic Band cards, right? So those contain some location analysis as well as activity analysis that Disney can use to present you with a much better next experience or a much more relevant next experience. So having gone through a number of those analytical methods, just one more lens to kind of look at this through. Customer lifetime value really does have unique uses across the customer life cycle. So that first example we did was around, should we spend this much money to acquire a customer? Also in the discover and explore phase, which we think of as kind of the awareness phase, is what are the channels that deliver us the most high value customers over time? How do we look back on that customer path analysis and determine what of the channels and sources we had really brought us those leads that turned into high value customers? And what do we do with that information? We likely repeat promotions on those channels. In the buy and the use phase, we're thinking about how do we get the maximum value from this customer? What's the upsell, cross-sell analysis we need to be doing here? How do we further leverage this high value account or person? And finally, when it comes to asking and engaging, we're looking at loyalty programs. We're looking at customer lifetime value with a bit more data than we had before, more dynamic data, product usage, and things of that nature. We are trying really hard not to let high value customers churn by identifying them and building programs against them to prevent that. We're also trying to get them to increase their loyalty so that their risk of churn is further diminished. Note the use of some of the other analytical methods across the bottom. Again, one of those helpful takeaway graphics, so we can see that customer lookalike targeting is a particularly valuable method, analytical method in that discover awareness phase. We see cross-sell and upsell analysis appear again in that buy and use phase, that contract and start using the product phase, and then of course that attrition analysis again once we've closed a customer. It's really just another way, another lens to view the criticality of the CLTV metric. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you so much, Allison. So with all of this in mind, the question that certainly comes down to is how do we begin leveraging this information? Some of the items that Allison talked about, text analysis, product correlation analysis, are absolutely areas that we can begin working on. But predominant question that we want to answer today is, so let's say we do the process of CLV analysis, and somewhere in the CRM or in a database or in a spreadsheet, after we've done our modeling, we have this data. What now? Does that mean that if a certain user that has low CLV that we stop responding to their phone calls? Of course not. So today what I want to do is walk you through what the approach can be to design an optimal marketing experience once you know where to invest, and how to do it with the technology stack that might be available to you. So for the ease of the example, we obviously cannot tackle every possible use case. We will talk about online experiences because the majority of businesses today are direct to consumer, or majority of businesses that are really working on CLV models are the ones that are able to sell directly to customers. Companies that are more in the CPG space are also asking themselves a question of CLV, but it becomes a much more difficult answer for them, considering that many of them do not sell directly. So if you do sell directly, and if you do sell directly online, let's look at a couple of examples of how you can use this information. So once we have raw data, there is so much that we can be doing on a user by user level, or from the space of the personalization. How do we personalize the experience differently for people with different CLV data or the data point? But we can also do quite a bit by properly segmenting our users. So those where we have high CLV, they probably are members of our loyalty program, and we probably do not even need to spend that much money and time remarketing them. We simply need to provide good customer service to them, potentially, because we already know that for whatever reason they love our business and they keep buying from us. Then we have medium CLV customers, where they require ongoing attention, they require ongoing nurturing, and they might not be 100% convinced of the value, but they continue to buy now products and services, so we might need to think of how to target them different. And then we have our low CLV customers. They have very variable purchasing habits, meaning that they are tricky to predict. We don't know if they are going to buy from us or not. They make infrequent purchases. And some people would advocate that we should not really be spending that much money on those customers if they end up buying from us organically by simply finding out about our business. Great. That means that we have a better profit margin because we did not spend a lot of money on acquiring them. But in the long run, that type of customers is not really going to drive our business forward. And certainly what you want to do is look at the percentage-wise, each bucket of customers, percentage-wise, is it 30%, 40%, 50%? This low CLV, if a majority of your customers are the ones that have low CLV, then it means that your business is very much transactional and you have a hard time building loyalty. In fact, that was one of the challenges that many companies encountered when they were using tools like Living Social and Groupon. They would offer wonderful discounts. They would acquire customers, but all of those customers were one-time customers that merely went to that yoga studio, to that restaurant, because the discount was so good, not because they would come back to that place under any other circumstances. And in order for us to begin using this information, such as CRM, we certainly need to have our marketing stack closely integrated together. So when we have customer lifetime value data available in our CRM, we can begin targeting people based on that information. And here's an idea, or almost a blueprint of how a modern digital analytics stack looks like that will allow you to do that. So on the left side, you have your digital channels that drive traffic to your website. That you might have display, you might have a video, advertising on YouTube, search, email, social, whatever that is. You have different marketing channels that are driving traffic to the website. And certainly a common question is around attribution modeling. How do these channels work together, and which one gets the credit? Then looking at the center of the image, we have our website. We might have a tag management system that we use to deploy different personalization tools, analytics tools. We have our single customer view that is accomplished with a tool like Google Analytics or Adobe Omniture. And then very often we have a data warehouse that collects and stores all the information. And then on the right side, we have our user data sets or our CRM system. And so the data, such as customer lifetime value, travels from your CRM into your analytics, where you can build customer segments. And then you can target those customer segments with different marketing campaigns. So you can see the data flows throughout those three different platform solutions. And here's an example for you using a CRM. We have a website visitor that completes a series of purchases. Customer data and transaction history, CLV data, is recorded or calculated inside our CRM. And then we take that data and we upload it back into Google Analytics, or into DoubleClick or into AdWords, so you can start using it for advertising purposes. So here's an example from Google Analytics where we add custom dimension, custom metric, customer lifetime value, and you can see, you can then start building reports such as what the geolocations have the best or have the most customers with the highest customer lifetime value. So here we have different users. We have our sales data, we have our direct mail data, we have our offline data, revenue data, and customer lifetime value information. And now you can begin leveraging this information when you start running your targeting campaigns in let's say DoubleClick or in AdWords or in really any other solution that you might be inclined to use. So creating a segment that you want to market or remarket to based on CLV within a DoubleClick here, as we can see, or within AdWords. And then you can not just retarget those customers that you already acquired, but you can create similar audiences, lookalike audiences that Allison has talked about early in the presentation. And then we can target people that have never been to the website, but that are similar in their various online behaviors to the customer segments that generate the most profit for our business right now. Hence, you are targeting people that hopefully in the future will join your segment of most profitable customers. And so there are three things that we at the end are able to accomplish. We can retarget customers based on their CLV. So if I know that there is a group of customers that have a high or medium CLV, it might be worse for me to actually retarget them because I know that they will end up buying. Versus those that have very low CLV, maybe it doesn't even make sense for me to target them on frequent basis because I will simply be spending advertising dollars without any results. I can also exclude current customers with low CLV from my campaigns. And then I can reach users that are similar to the best customers that I have right now. And you can see that this type of advertising, which in essence is CRM-based advertising, because we are running ads based on the CRM data, they are 47% more effective than traditional targeting. And here is a case study that we've done with Pelican water system, an omnichannel retailer of different purification and water products. And Google actually wrote a case study about our work. And using the same methodology, you can see they discovered ROI of their paid advertising campaigns was 130% higher than they previously measured, because they were not able to attribute many of their campaigns. And learnings, 15% of all offline sales are influenced by AdWords, 21% of all sales start with AdWords. So they're able to see that certain AdWords campaigns are responsible for generating the most profitable customer types. And by focusing on those customer types, they were able to increase their conversion rates by triple digits.
Thank you, Michael. That's a really, oh, pardon me.
No, I was just about to say, let me turn this over to Allison to talk about maturity level indicators.
Thank you, Michael. Sorry about that. I was going to say, really great dialogue about the various applications. Good illustration of really how important this metric is. So I want to talk about, for the next few minutes, 6 maturity level indicators. And first I want to say why there are 6. It's actually really hard to consider maturity and sort of self-assess without some categories so that we can really diagnose where some issues lie. The fact is, it's likely that you're strong in some components and weak in others. So it's just helpful to kind of make this a bit more granular to dig in. So let's take a look. We start with strategy, and I'll sum this up by saying this is really about whether customer analytics has C-level support or whether it's more of a tactical conversation deeper in the organization. The distinction is truly critical. Time and time again, when we ask customers what made this program work, it is really about having an executive influencer to say, this is important, this requires investment, this requires testing and patience. The next is organization. The customer analytics function we find is largely kept in-house. So almost 2/3 of senior analytics professionals that we've surveyed say they manage it in their own organizations. As a result, the process of designing this internal function requires a lot of attention, specifically to structure and skills that make up the team. It's just as important to manage those things when it comes to external partnerships, but that's really what this indicator is all about, being intellectually honest about the skills and structure you have and whether that's serving your analytics function well. The next one is data. Michael said earlier, we all know garbage in, garbage out. That's what we're dealing with here. We have to evaluate our data to understand our capabilities in analytics. Our outputs are only as valuable as the quality and quantity of customer data inputs. Data integration, as Michael showed you, there are stats. I have stats. His were just as compelling. I'll skip mine. The fact is, data quality really does haunt analytics professionals, so you're not alone there. It's not expected that anybody will self-assess quite highly here. But this is really something that requires, one of those categories that requires a lot more work to really make the analytics function flourish. The next is analytics and measurement. There's a host of statistical and data mining techniques available to analytics users. There is lots of data science approaches, but a true sign of maturity here isn't necessarily the sophistication of those methods, as cool as that is, but rather the strength of the connection to business and financial metrics. So this dimension really, when one self-assesses with this, we're really looking at not only the use of analytical techniques, but how we're using those results to measure the success of actual customer programs. Just a lot more context than it seems. The next is process. Effective analytics really requires well-defined processes, not only to generate insights, but to first disseminate them and then apply them. These are really three different skill sets, three different activities: generating the insights with those analytical tools and those sophisticated methodologies, disseminating them to people who can use them, and then applying them so that they make a difference for the customer. So this dimension really evaluates the process that firms use to construct customer analytics projects, not only building those analytics, but again, deriving the insights and sharing them so that they can have customer impact. Pardon me. Technology is final and next. This is really about three pillars of technology that we see most commonly used. Predictive analytics tools, technologies that help distribute analytics like business intelligence tools, and technologies that help activate them like cross-channel campaign management tools, those engagement capabilities that we all have in our marketing automation programs and things of that nature, our advertising programs. So this dimension really evaluates the depth and breadth of the technologies used to support the analytics function across the board. Again, building the insights, sharing them with those who can do something about it, and applying them so that customers feel like they're better understood because of your analytics program. So when we look at those 6 indicators and we ask customers to self-assess, or we collect some of that data from online surveys, if you will, we find 4 levels of customer analytics maturity. We see them. What we want to do is give a little more detail here so that you can understand what rookies, dabblers, and pros and gurus look like, but also what dimensions really help firms move from one to the next. So we'll start with what we call category 1, being rookies. What strikes me about folks in this category is that we are, and lots of us live here, talking about analytics, but really without a formal investment, really without that executive supporter. It's ad hoc, it's uncoordinated. We talk about it in limited channels like email analytics, and generally the role is performed by generalists with limited depth in the analytics function. So without surprise, firms in this category typically struggle to get their data house in order and limit their analysis with some of the data available in transactional systems. So 2 real issues here: the ability to work with data and analyze data in ways that are rigorous, and then the ability to sort of collect data from systems that aren't purely transactional. The next is dabblers. They've cleared some hurdles. Obviously, they're aligned to business needs, like simple ones, right? Things that we know are critical. Customer acquisition, perhaps retention and loyalty, nothing wrong with those goals. Additionally, they're leveraging more data, maybe customer interaction data, that type of data that we described earlier that's more dynamic than static. And we're incorporating that into analytics. So that's what dabblers look like. We see pros at sort of 3 level of 4. Pros do treat analytics as a strategic priority. They use advanced predictive analytics for customer analysis. They're proactive about that, generate insights to apply insights methodology that calls for infusing insights into the business. The real difference here is that analytics aren't managed in silos. So we talked a little bit earlier about the value of recognizing the interdependency of analytical techniques. We went through a number of them. And the maturity level here is really associated with blending customer lifetime value with a number of those techniques that we covered. It impacts things like digital analytics, attribution analysis, marketing, and business. That's really an escalation from things like email, website, and other sort of transactional and engagement platform analytics. So we're raising the bar quite a bit as pros. The final one that we call level 4 is gurus. It's a really high bar. These firms commit to influence basically every interaction that a customer has with them to improve that experience they're having in that interaction with the analytics that they've discovered. So they're really employing at every interaction, things like next best analysis, things like how valuable is this customer and what does that mean for next best recommendation analysis and things of that nature. They have strong multidisciplinary teams of business savvy scientists and technologists supported by strong technology and analytics platforms, and services partner networks, also really, really critical to these firms. At the guru level, even though I said that lots of folks have the internal structure for analytics teams, at the guru level, you're always seeing external partnerships as well. Another marker of these firms, no surprise, is significant executive buy-in. We see that not because an executive says, yes, I agree, yes, I want to do that, but because it's demonstrated in the use of analytics and decisions across business metrics and across the customer life cycle. Again, a really high bar here, but it does include some of those indicators that say we're at a really high level of maturity. And finally, I include this slide just to kind of check in and say, hey, as a reminder, this is not an academic exercise. This isn't something we do for no reason or something we do to keep ourselves busy. There's a demonstrable improvement in ability to manage and deliver positive client experiences as maturity levels increase. At the most basic maturity, organizations are essentially treating customers as members of a single vector segment. We're building segments by industry or by geography or by product owned, things that are static. And at the most mature, analytics are very hard at work all of the time, again, infused in all of those interactions, powering in-moment experiences with dynamic data and dynamic models. So again, not an academic exercise, something we do because it really, really moves the needle on our business. That concludes my comments, Michael.
Thank you so much, Allison. So moving into a Q&A section, I know we just have a few minutes. One question that I see here on the panel is around why is this so prevalent right now, right? So customer lifetime value is not a new metric, not something that we've discovered in 2018. It has been there all along, but it seems like over the past 4, 5, 6 years, the more popular metric was, is my tweet amplified, or how many likes does my picture get, not what are my customer lifetime value cohorts. What do you think is driving this change in analytical behavior?
It's a great question. I would answer that question with sort of 3 categories of answers. The first is that we find marketers are increasingly responsible for the revenue outcome. So the last time we ran the survey with this particular question, 92% of CMOs had a revenue outcome as part of their purview, part of their evaluation, part of their compensation plan, perhaps. And that number has increased for the last couple of years. So we are seeing our metrics change as CMOs. We're seeing past responsibility be something like MQLs and SQLs and deeper and deeper into the funnel. But finally, we've arrived to say we're here as CMOs and we're responsible for a revenue outcome. So we have to pay attention to things like profitability in ways that we never did. I think that's the first reason. I think the second reason is our analytical capability has simply increased. We've recognized that we need to increase that capability to achieve the revenue outcome that I just described. We've made some better hires. We've made some better partnerships, external partnerships, so folks can kind of help us with this where our skills kind of fall short, which they often do. It's a new skill to marketers. So I think there's that capability and talent that we now have access to that we didn't before. And I'll just finish by saying I also think we have access to far more data sources. So I remember, using data like the CRM and the marketing automation platform and lots of demographic data, but less so that dynamic data that we're using in those platforms that you talked about and I talked about. We're also able to identify things like, well, what kind of content are they consuming across the web outside of my brand-owned platforms? That's also a great source of dynamic data. We've turned to our brethren in customer service and said, what are people telling you? What are some of the data that you have? How do we get our hands on it? How do we structure it to incorporate it into our models? I mentioned text analytics. We've got capabilities to look at sources that were unstructured and just couldn't feed models before. We just couldn't do that. But now, as time goes on, we have access to more and more granular level data. So kind of a wordy response, I apologize, but I think those are 3 really core components.
Thank you. Well, totally makes sense. And the other question that I see being submitted is almost twofold. So I think part of the question is almost for me asking about, that one of the organizations is working on their full integration between CRM platform, analytical platform, and they're also putting together a data management platform. and the goal for them to have everything is end of 2019. But the average tenure of the CMO or the head marketing officer is between 2 or 3 years. So how do you think those two play together when a project like this might take an organization longer than the tenure of the person who started?
That question is too good, isn't it? It's too good. My answer is that we all need a 5-year plan. I think organizations are really good at 1-year plans. I think some of them are even really good at 10-year plans. But for us to really make the investments that count, we really need to know what we want our organization to look like in 5 years. And more granular than that, we need to know what we want our organization to look like from a revenue mix perspective in 5 years. How are we going to make money? And how does that translate to the meaning and the purpose behind that project of integrating some of the platforms? So I don't want kind of to see a CMO come in who does have typically a 2-year tenure, we know, and kind of say, we're going to change the game, we're going to go to market in a different way, unless that all makes such perfect sense that you can really move the organization around like that. But I'd far rather see a collaborative executive approach to going to market, that doesn't ebb and flow with new resources at the CMO level.
And one thing that I would add from my side is, as complex as these projects, integration projects tend to be, there is no need to wait 2 or 3 years until you can start getting the results of the project. You can very much start building partial integrations or start doing some application of customer lifetime value within a few months, right? So a project can take you 3 or 4 months to pilot it, and then you have some of the preliminary data points that will help you hopefully secure a longer tenure at the company, but also demonstrate why a 2 or 3 year integration project is something that the organization needs. I would say that projects that tend to fail are the ones where it seems like there's no end in sight, and no one wants to wait 3 years for clean, accurate data, because from the ROI standpoint, yes, the integration can be picture perfect, but you've really generated 0 business value at that point. And
there's no executive team in the world that will wait that long for a result. You're absolutely right.
Wonderful. It seems like you're absolutely on the same page. I would say start this pilot, start this testing. Many organizations, when we talk about testing, many companies think of testing as A/B testing, right, or multivariate testing. I think it's important to think of testing as not just thinking of color or elements on the page, but testing different methods, testing different approaches, testing different small integrations, and then use that to put the larger projects in motion.
It's true. One thing we find all the time is that waiting for perfection is the #1 way to simply get behind competitively.
And in this environment, being behind means that your company might go out of business, and you will have to look for another job because it's just so competitive.
Yep. Very demanding
Allison,
customers.
we are about the time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here's our contact information. I hope everyone found this event to be valuable. I will certainly be sharing this webinar, as I mentioned, online. Allison, again, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me.